From the Thom Hartmann Report Daily Take. Can we survive a new apartheid engineered by America's elites? Musk and Rubio's deliberate gutting of USAID and the lives it's ending every hour. Published by Thom Hartmann, June 2nd, 2025. The following is a song inspired by this article.
In the darkness of the past, we thought we closed that door. The chains of hatred shattered, we said nevermore. But now I see the shadows there crawling back to life. Musk and Rubio smiling, feeding on this strife. Can you feel the children crying? Do you hear the mothers weep? The ghosts of old apartheid waking from their sleep. Is this the apartheid revival, white greed in a new disguise? As black blood flows like rivers, who will stand and rise? Is this the apartheid revival, the same old hate in modern style? As children beg for mercy, do you see their hollow eyes? From South Africa to DC, the money talks so loud. In boardrooms and in Congress, it's poison to the crowd. Cuts to aid and justice, hearts turn cold as stone. They cheer for silent suffering as Africa stands alone. Can you hear the distant thunder, the cries beneath the lies? A history repeating while the guilty hide. Is this the apartheid revival, white greed in a new disguise? As black blood flows like rivers, who will stand and rise? Is this the apartheid revival, the same old hate in modern style? As children beg for mercy, do you see their hollow eyes? The past was meant to teach us to never turn away. But power's got no conscience, and billionaires don't pray. They say no one's dying, but every hour's grave. Their lies can't hide the slaughter, the lives they will not save. Is this the apartheid revival, white greed in a new disguise? As black blood flows like rivers, who will stand and rise? Is this the apartheid revival, the same old hate in modern style? As children beg for mercy, do you see their hollow eyes? The ghosts of old apartheid won't rest while we're asleep. It's time to break the silence, the children's souls to keep.
It's one of the greatest preventable mass deaths in modern history. Around 2 people every minute, every day, day and night, week after week, soon to be year after year. In the time it takes you to read this article, several dozen children will have died because of actions taken, with full knowledge of this consequence, by South African immigrant Elon Musk, Big Balls, and his teenage buddies, Donald Trump, and Marco Rubio. Children who wanted to live as desperately as do yours and mine, whose parents grieve them every bit as much as we would grieve the death of our own kids, are dying as you read these words. Even worse, Musk and Rubio keep lying about the blood on their hands. Nobody knows if Rubio's drinking himself to sleep to deal with the guilt, but according to New York Times, Musk is taking mind-numbing drugs at a level that would make Charles Manson blush. Rubio says, quote, "No one has died because of USAID cuts. No children are dying under my watch, end quote. Elon Musk proclaimed, as the New York Times noted in an article entitled, quote, Musk said no one has died since aid was cut. That isn't true, end quote. Quote, no one has died as a result of a brief pause due to a sanity check on foreign aid funding. No one, end quote. Musk has called USAID, the agency administering programs like George W. Bush's PEPFAR, which has saved tens of millions of lives, mostly in Africa, quote, a criminal organization, and adding that it was, quote, time for it to die, end quote. But why? Musk and his family fled white-ruled South Africa in 1989, as the transition to majority black rule was well underway. Could that have something to do with his antipathy toward USAID? Back in 1886, after overturning the veto of apartheid fan Ronald Reagan, a democratically controlled U.S. Congress passed the Comprehensive Anti-Apartheid Act of 1986, which empowered the U.S. Agency for International Development, USAID, to play a leading role in undermining South Africa's brutal white supremacist apartheid regime. USAID's anti-apartheid efforts was led by Timothy Bork, Mission Director, General Counsel, Director of the Office of the Sahel of West Africa, and Deputy Assistant Administrator for the agency. He spent 19 years with USAID tackling apartheid in South Africa. Bork's and his colleagues' efforts were ultimately successful in bringing down apartheid. USAID redirected much of its South African funding towards supporting South African black-led grassroots organizations, trade unions, educational institutions, and legal defense groups. USAID funded legal assistance to South African political prisoners and anti-apartheid activists. It supported black trade unions, which were central to mass resistance against apartheid. It provided resources to community development and education programs that were racially inclusive. This was all possible because the Comprehensive Anti-Apartheid Act of 1986 codified sanctions against South Africa and mandated that U.S. aid could only support efforts to end apartheid and empower that country's black majority. USAID implemented this by funding programs that strengthened the capacity for the anti-apartheid opposition, including Nelson Mandela's ANC-aligned civil society. It also funded programs in South Africa that emphasized institution building and human rights education that thus helping produce the groundwork for democratic governance. In the early 1990s, USAID played a direct role in supporting the transition to democracy in South Africa. It helped fund election infrastructure for the 1994 democratic elections. It provided support for the Independent Electoral Commission, IEC. It funded civic education campaigns to help previously disenfranchised South Africans understand their voting rights. According to Princeton Lyman, the former U.S. ambassador to South Africa, USAID programs were the essential core that built the non-governmental infrastructure in that country that led to the end of apartheid and whites-only rule. USAID historical documents chronicle how over $500 million was spent between the mid-1980s and early 1990s on democracy, governance, education, and civil society development to end apartheid in South Africa. Their successful efforts, made possible by the Anti-Apartheid Act of 1986, included economic sanctions. The act banned new U.S. investments in South Africa, prohibited bank loans to the South African government, and restricted imports of certain South African goods, including coal, uranium, and agricultural products. Air travel restrictions that barred South African Airways from landing in the United States. Assistance to victims of apartheid. The act authorized support for black South Africans, including scholarships, community development, and legal aid. The act's sanctions and USAID's implementation efforts were to support the indigenous anti-apartheid movement, created massive economic pressure on South Africa, producing a decline in foreign investment and trade. This economic strain, combined with internal resistance and international condemnation, led to the end of the apartheid regime on May 4, 1990, and the formation of that nation's first truly democratic government in 1994. That's why, on February 2nd of this year, Musk proudly tweeted about his effort that would lead to the eventual death of millions of children. Quote, "We spent the weekend feeding USAID into the wood chipper. Could gone to some great parties. Did that instead." End quote. As Bill Gates told the Financial Times, quote, "The picture of the world's richest man killing the world's poorest children is not a pretty one. I'd love for him to go in and meet the children that have now been infected with HIV because he cut that money." End quote. Associate Professor of Global Health at Boston University, Brooke Nichols, has done the math, and it's pretty bulletproof. She estimated that at least 300,000 people have already died because of Musk's, Trump's, and Rubio's gutting USAID, most of them children. Her impact tracker that documents the consequences of these cuts estimates that 103 people are dying every hour. Not only is this a human tragedy that should horrify every American, although white supremacists seem to be celebrating it, but it's also doing very real damage to America's, quote, soft power, end quote, around the world. China is rushing into many of the countries where USAID operated to provide relief and infrastructure with an eye to building relationships that could lead to new trading partners and new access to valuable minerals and other resources. Is surrendering our political and moral leadership in Africa and other undeveloped parts of the world simply payback by a cabal of South African immigrants for the loss of their white-run government? Is Trump's offering sanctuary and government-funded flights into America to white and white-only South Africans further proof of this? Or did they do it merely to kneecap the government's soft power that's kept Russia and China at bay in much of the developing world? Was it in favor to Putin or Xi? Or was it simply a drug-fueled whim? Quote, "Hey, let's kill a few million people for fun," end quote. While the death and damage Musk, Trump, and Rubio are causing is well documented, few in our media are asking the essential question, why? Why are these men celebrating the death of, so far, hundreds of thousands of children and the eventual death of millions, along with the golden opportunity for expanding political power they've handed to Russia and China? I don't know the reason. The cost of USAID is pretty minimal and won't have any meaningful effect on our deficit or debt, but it's a pretty essential question we should all have the right to know the answer to. What rationale or logic do you think is behind this?